Hi, Bob.
Thank you for doing this today.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate you coming out. You've been named to the Barron's list of top 1,200 financial advisors in 2018.
Yes.
That actually goes all the way back to 2008. Each year, you've also been named this year, 2018, to the Forbes Best in State list of financial advisors and the Financial Times top 400 financial advisors from 2015 all the way to 2018. So I'm excited today for us to be talking about the market a bit and developing a focus on building wealth. So tell me, how did you get your start in financial advisory work and private wealth advisory work, and what sort of led you into that path?
So between my sophomore and freshman year in college, I got a job fighting fires with the Forest Service up in Idaho. So I packed me and most of my worldly possessions in my Fiat and drove all the way to Idaho.
Nice.
And when I was on the fire crew, what you realize is it was a hot summer, so we fought fires all over the West. You don't spend any money. And so all this money kind of piled up in my checking account, so I got back to school, and I asked my roommate, I wonder what we should do with all this money. He says, you should go see my dad, who's a financial advisor in Scottsdale, Arizona. So I jumped in my Fiat and drove on down to Scottsdale. And I remember the meeting. He sat behind a very big wood desk and a very big leather chair. And he said, young man, you should take this money and put it into a money market investment. It's going to go to 18% interest. You should do just fine. Here's the application. All the way back to school, I was like, wow, he knows what to do with money. Can you imagine what an amazing job that would be? At that point, I had decided that that's what I wanted to do. So that's the beginning.
Outstanding. Well, I've known you for a lot of years, and one thing that I know about you is that you have a tremendous work ethic. How did you come by that?
Well, we were raised Air Force. My dad was in the Air Force. And how you come about a lot of these traits is it comes from your parents.
Right,
personal responsibility was a big thing around the family. And being the oldest, I kind of fell onto my shoulders for sure.
Right.
And, you know, you remember the events when you were a kid. And I remember we were in North Dakota. We lived coast to coast. And my 3 brothers and sisters and I, we had raked this giant pile of leaves into the yard. And we'd been jumping in them all afternoon. And my dad came out after we were done jumping at it, and he said, you need to help me rake up these leaves. And I remember thinking to myself, and I think I actually said out loud, I really don't want to. And he explained to me that that wasn't really part of the equation. Me wanting to do this didn't matter. This was something I get to do.
Outstanding. Parents everywhere are going to love that story. The other thing that comes to mind when I think about you, Ralph, is discipline. And for a bunch of years, for as long as I've known you, you've gotten up early every day. You've taken yourself to the gym to work hard on your physical condition. How long have you been doing that?
So do you remember back when you would get weights and there was a bar and they had plastic weights with cement on the inside?
Right.
And so there was a point somewhere back in there, I must have been 14 or 15, where I must have asked my parents for that as a gift for Christmas.
Okay.
And they got me a weight set. And Bob, I've always loved that you could take weights and change your physical shape. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah,
I remember my senior year, we had to go get a suit for prom. And the suits on the racks that everyone was renting wouldn't fit because the drop between my shoulders and my waist was too severe.
Wow.
And so I've been lifting weights since a long time.
All right.
Since I was 14.
So would you call that a habit, an obsession, or a commitment?
Oh, it's a commitment.
It's a commitment. Outstanding. How does that kind of discipline that you've taken in your personal life carry over to your professional life, specifically in what you do?
Well, you probably know as well as I do that staying in shape is easier than getting in shape.
Yes.
And so the discipline of financial planning is boring, really, because what you're going to do is you're going to take a span of time, 20 years, and we're going to consistently save and invest repeatedly for 20 years. And at the end of that span of time, you might have enough. I mean, that's the discipline you bring to the process, which is a consistent effort year after year after year. And I will have to say, I find it kind of exciting, but it is in many cases quite boring, because what you're going to do is the discipline of saving and investing year after year after year.
Right. And you describe your business as a private wealth advisory firm. How do you define that to people that come and talk to you?
You know, when people come talk to me, what they want is, well, here's how this goes. I say, what do you want?
Right.
And many times, the answer I get is a kind of a vague answer. And so I help clients kind of figure that out. What do you want? Because if you can articulate and we can figure out what you want, we can probably build a plan to get there. And so what do people want? Oh, I don't know. It's the normal kind of things. I'd like to have enough money so at some point I can not go to work. I want to make sure I can send my children to school if they want to go to school.
Right.
It's the whole list. I want to make sure we can buy a house.
Right.
It's the list of things you want. It's also the other things, which is if I die, is my family still going to be okay?
Yep.
It's the whole gamut of financial planning. And I help people figure that out and then apply the discipline necessary consistently year after year after year to make it work.
Sure. So much of what you do is investment management activity. So let's talk a little bit about the markets that you have access to, which are the public markets.
Yes.
And so if we go back and we look at that through an historical lens, what I've learned is that since the inception of time, the creation of the stock market until today, year over year, there's about a 7% return on the market. And it looks like a fairly consistent curve if you smooth it out. Obviously, we've got a lot of peaks and valleys in there. But if you smooth it out, it really looks like a very consistent curve. Is that a benchmark that you use as a guidepost for investing for others?
Yes, absolutely. You're going to use relevant benchmarks. We do competitive scans about every 6 months. The question I want to always answer to myself as to our clients, are we doing competitive work?
Right.
One of the benchmarks that is universally accepted is the S&P 500 as a good frame of reference. It is not necessarily what you would use to benchmark your results, because you may not be that risky.
Right.
You know, the market can have some pretty wild swings, and so depending upon how much risk you choose is going to drive what a relevant benchmark would be.
Right.
But the S&P is a common benchmark, yes.
So I also know that you get clients that are in all different stages of their investing careers, you know, from beginning all the way to the end or close to the end. And so you really have to sit down and analyze, you know, what is it that they need in particular. So as I understand it, a big part of this and a big part of what your firm does is actually conduct a financial advisory session with your clients. How does that normally work? You sit down and gather data, put it into a model, and then sit down with them, or do you sit down with them and really kind of go over what their life plans are, like you talked about earlier?
So we do primarily financial planning.
Right.
And financial planning is the same process it was when I started 30 plus years ago, which is you identify what it is you want, figure out where you are, run some diagnostics and analysis to determine what the gaps are, figure out what the solutions are to put these in place, and then where I spend most of my time now is on the review process, making sure everything continues to move forward. Whether the markets go up, markets go down, it doesn't really matter. You still want to retire when you want to retire, don't you?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So my job is to make sure the plan works and we deal with what happens as we're going along the way.
Sure.
That process has never changed.
So that's a long period of time that we're typically talking about for anyone who wants to get to retirement, 20,
Yes.
30 years,
Can
a lot
be.
of times, right? In that span of time, and particularly in your professional career, there have been some several significant, sort of what I would call devastating events to the market, and that would happen to people's portfolio.
Yes.
By extension. 3 of those in particular. The first one that I recall is Black Monday, 1987. Secondly would be the tech crisis that occurred back in 2000, 2001 timeframe. And then the last one that happened even most recently, 2008 and 9, the financial crisis. Now I recall that Black Monday, we lost about 22.6% of the market's value.
In a day.
In a day. And then we look to the tech crisis, and over a period of 18 months or so, we lost over $5 trillion in market value. And then even most recently with the financial crisis that I mentioned, we lost over 50% of the market's value over a span of about a year, year and a half. How do you keep people focused on investing when they have significant events like that? How do you refocus them out onto the broader scheme?
So we'll talk about a couple points here. One of them is that any client who comes in for a review meeting, we're going to take a look at their financial plan, we're going to take a look at their investments, we're going to measure how much risk is in the portfolio. This is fairly easy to do because you can just quantify how much your percentages are in the risky stuff, the equities.
Right.
And you can, by definition, determine what the normal distribution might be on how much up or down is going to go. Now, no one gets too mad when we make too much money. People get mad when we lose money, right?
Right.
And so if you are a moderate risk investor, that means that under kind of a normal cycle, if it's really bad, we'll lose a third of your money. And Bob, we would ask every meeting, this is moderate, this is our definition of moderate, this is what it means to be moderate. By the way, we can lose a third of the money, and I will take my calculator out, and I will calculate how much that is.
Right.
And I will confirm with them that that is still acceptable. So that is what we do every time we meet, is to confirm. It is all about the risk.
Right.
Do you remember 1987? That was Black Monday, and it was a huge drop in one day.
Yeah.
I remember I had taken on a new client, and it was a little bit before that, and I remember saying to them, I said, you know, you have a non-diversified portfolio. We should probably diversify the portfolio and put some things in there that don't tend to be market-based, and maybe we should bonds and CDs and safer stuff in the portfolio. And they were older, they're getting ready to retire, and they said, that sounds fine, Ralph, go ahead and do that. So we did. We took the portfolio, we took it from aggressive to moderate, and then Black Monday hit. And their portfolio didn't hardly go down at all. Oh, it was so good. And they thought I was a genius.
That's awesome.
Oh my gosh. And so in the tech bubble, I remember that clients would get upset with us because our portfolio was up, 16%. And their friend's portfolio was up 20%. And they're like, seriously, I'm only up 16%? And we didn't play in the tech game.
Right.
Because the danger and risk on that was just too high. So we stuck true to discipline. And it was kind of painful because performance was good, but not as good as if you bet all your money on internet stocks.
Right, right.
But you asked, how do we protect? When the market rolled over, our portfolios went down some, but not that much. Same thing happened in 2002, 2003, and that same kind of downturn. Portfolios were down a little bit, but not near as much as the S&P. And then 2008, that was the one where we had the most dramatic downturn. We estimated our moderate portfolios would go down between, 25 and 35%, 33. And that's exactly what happened. So I will say that not very many people were happy. No one likes their portfolio to go down.
Right.
But we did have a few that were like, hey man, thank you very much. Thanks for not losing all our money. We appreciate the fact that it went down as much as we thought it would.
Terrific. That's
and
awesome.
We were back to the high point in 3 years. The general market took 5.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's just because we didn't fall near as far and we recovered nicely. On
Outstanding,
the other side.
outstanding. Terrific.
Yes.
So Ralph, as I understand it, we've got, and as is obvious, we've got a huge change in demographics in this country. How has that impacted some of the planning that you do?
The planning has shifted, Bob. It went from accumulation planning to distribution planning. Now, you know that to accumulate a lot of wealth is fairly easy, really. Give me about 20 years and a consistent effort on your part, no problem. We can get enough money in that pile of stuff that you could retire. Beautiful. Now the demographics of the baby boomers are shifting the focus, and the focus now is on distribution planning. And distribution planning means that the risks that you're going to think about have shifted.
Right.
If you wake up and you're 60 and decide you want to retire, you have potentially a 30 to 35 year span of time in front of you. Do you know that if you live on, I don't know, pick a number, 120,000 a year, 30 years from now, do you know how much money you need to have?
No.
To have the same lifestyle.
Right, right.
398,000 per year.
Okay.
In order to be financially independent at 120,000 a year, you only need 3 million. You need almost 10 million to support the lifestyle when you get that old.
Right.
This is why this has been a shift. And so when we talk to our clients, the concern and risk that people want to talk about is the market risk, right?
Right.
But I argue that that is a risk you can control and a risk you can manage. What is a more important risk is purchase power risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people don't talk about purchase power risk or interest rate risk. These are kind of quiet problems.
Right.
And those are the ones we see. The art of distribution planning is important. We're spending most of our time working with clients on distribution planning right now.
Right, right. And so I know that the Fed, for instance, targets 2% as a target inflation rate.
Yes.
So if we continue to do that 2% every year over 20 years, we're talking about a significant amount of money.
Bob, you're also assuming that they get that right.
Right.
Yeah, we use a 3.5% or 4% inflation factor because that's more towards historical norms.
Understand, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really big deal. It turns 120,000 into 400,000. And so it's a big deal.
That's tremendous. There's some really great examples of sort of how to minimize and mitigate risk. So let's talk a little bit about investment strategies, maybe some hits and misses. What are some things that you've seen, some mistakes that you've seen clients make in their investment decisions over the years?
Some of the most dramatic ones are market timing decisions. We really work to control the market timing decisions. What you find is you're wrong more often than not.
Right.
We work really hard to try and eliminate as many of the mistakes you can eliminate out of the mix. And so we could talk about mutual fund errors, but there's just a lot of the decisions you can take off the table if you get things set up correctly. And so we work on that.
I remember as a youth out of college, I did my first investment into a stock, a company called Eagle Computers. Never heard of them. There's a reason for that. The guy that led the company, that was the brain trust, if you will, drove his Porsche off a cliff, and the market in that stock dropped by like 2/3 in about 2 months.
Wow.
So yeah, I understand the whole premise around investing in specific assets and how problematic that can be. But how do you mitigate that in someone's mind in terms of, how do you show them a better path for investing? Is it really just demonstrating that they need to be diversified, just like they would be diversified in anything else?
You see a lot of different behavior, but we work on trying to influence the behavior of our clients so that they understand this is all about the risk. And you can control a lot of the risks. And so what we often see is someone comes in and they have an individual stock in their personal portfolio. And I say, well, what's up with this individual stock? Well, I used to work there, or I currently work there, and I got this stock. I'm like, great. Why don't we see if we can control some of the risk? And the game on that is you can take the single stock risk off, you can take the industry risk off, and all you're left is with market risk. I can control market risk by the ratios of how we diversify the portfolios.
Right, right,
So Bob,
right.
we are very keen to always be focused on, this is about the risk, making sure you keep good control of the risk.
Well, that really kind of flows over to a good next conversation that I'd like to have, and that's about a subgroup, or subcategory of investors, and that would be business owners and entrepreneurs. Now, what I've seen over my career span is that they typically are terrible at diversification, and it generally runs one of three reasons. First of all, they're fully invested in the success of their business, so that success and that sort of continuation of that business model, it drives every cash decision that they make. The second reason that I find is that their spending patterns and their priorities and requirements for available discretionary cash changes over time. So I've got a new product over here, I want to go over here with my investment, or I've got some other need over here that I need to, in order to grow my business, I'm going to go over here and put my available cash over here. And same pot, it's the same business activity and the same stock, if you will, and so there's no diversification there. And then the third one that I see a lot is that for small businesses in particular, they tend to have a crisis, quote unquote, about every 2 or 3 years. And that crisis will invariably soak up all of their available cash.
Yes.
So the question becomes, how do you convince someone who's really vested like that to diversify their assets and take money out of that business on a consistent basis? Isn't that really the most important time for having that kind of a vehicle to consistently pull money out, is when you're really emotionally committed to one particular asset? It's really to have a systematic way to get that money out.
And so how often do you see that, though?
I see it all the time, all the time.
Because I see, when we talk to business owners, we say, hey, what you're working on is to control the risk. You notice that's a theme that comes around again and again and again.
Yep.
What's the risk? The risk is your entire wealth is derived from this single enterprise. And your income, by the way, for buying food is derived on that same enterprise. So we advise, what you should probably consider is to take some of the money and diversify it out. Now, how many business owners do this?
Right.
Some.
Right.
Philosophically, I decided many, many years ago that I was going to always make sure that the business component of my wealth didn't supersede the rest of the portfolio. Now, that's a really hard and conscious decision. Most business owners will not and do not make that.
Right.
And the ones that do have that crisis every 2 to 3 years.
Yep.
And it sucks all the money back into the business.
Yeah.
What we counsel is that you want to take your assets and diversify it out. The reason you have a business is to support your life.
Right.
To support your financial goals.
Right.
This is all about getting enough money up, and business owners become wild card financial planning, which means if the business works and everything comes together and you get a liquidity event, you're richer than beyond belief. Right?
Right.
But the problem is that doesn't happen often enough,
Right.
and you've got no hedge on that bet.
Yep.
We ask them to hedge the bet. Let's take some of this money and get it consistently moving. The ones who do are the ones who do fine. By the way, this applies to executives as well as business owners. It's the same fundamental problem.
Right.
Too much wealth in one concentrated area.
Yep.
Or our job is to help undo that and get the money out. Some of the hardest decisions we ever have to make with clients are the timing of those decisions.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So that's a good segue, Ralph, into another observation that I've made over the years with business owners. They typically have all of their assets into two pools, and they're emotionally and psychologically committed to that one pool, and realizing, as you'd mentioned, an exit or a liquidity event. Well, that liquidity event might happen in one of three ways. They may find that they want to sell to another third party, a strategic typically that is a competitor, either inside or outside of their region, or someone that wants to vertically integrate. Secondly, they may look to a private equity group. They may look to them to either sell out 100%, or they may bring them on as a partner to recognize a liquidity event a few years afterwards. The third category that they're looking for typically is that they're going to look to their family, the next generation, right, to come in and buy them out, or their employee pool, to find a buyer within their employee pool. The reality is that almost never happens in a small business environment. Most small businesses will either dissolve on their own, or when the owner gets to a retirement age, they'll just shut the doors. Knowing that, and knowing that is an issue for them in diversification, again, what do you tell someone with that kind of mentality? How do you convince them to go with plan B?
In many cases, you don't, because they're so ingrained in the wild card strategy, which is to take this thing, this business, and turn it into unbelievable wealth, that they don't hedge it and don't prepare otherwise. And so we as financial advisors are generally just too conservative for that.
Right.
We're going to take a more conservative approach. It's not for lack of trying, Bob, because we're going to consistently work on trying to carve out pieces of the money,
right,
and get it somewhere else, so that if the business works, great, that's fantastic. If it doesn't, you're not in the soup kitchen.
Right,
And
right,
so
right.
The ones who do and don't have these crises every 2-3 years,
Right,
end up very successful. The ones who don't, if the wild card works, it's amazing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's talk for a few minutes about some of the pressures on your industry and the profession that you have spent so many years at, and look a little bit at the investment environment here in the United States. Over the years, over the many years that we've looked at this market conditions, and we've seen these significant events happen, just about after every single one of them, there's been a new round of legislation or regulation. How has that impacted you and what you try to do for your clients over the years, or just how you conduct your business?
We live in a very regulated industry, and so the work we do is supervised and scrutinized very carefully. It is part of the territory. If you do not like to have yourself supervised and regulated, don't become a financial advisor.
Right,
because it's chock-a-block full of these. The answer, Bob, is part of the deal. If you don't accept that, then you can't play. And so we work in maintaining good integrity with what we do. We don't put ourselves in positions where we would be questioned about that, and we work within the rules and regulations that are provided.
So some of the other risks that sort of bearing down on your industry that have been sort of tied to developments over the years includes development of new products and new investment devices, one of those being mutual funds. Can you tell us a little bit about how that impacted your profession when mutual funds actually came into existence?
Well, back in 1984, when I started, we had about a dozen mutual funds we could use. Now there's thousands and thousands of mutual funds. And what was interesting is that you talk about innovation in industries and in professions, and so the innovations have been fascinating. The mutual funds have a handful of inherent problems. You have manager performance or misbehavior. You have tax slop. Oh, sorry, that's not very technical. We have the tax problems with mutual funds and just the inherent cost of running mutual funds.
Right.
And so, Bob, do you know that we used to put mutual funds in place, and then the fund manager would underperform his benchmark and be like, oh, well, that's a bad pick. So we would then go find another fund, and we'd go pick a 5-star Morningstar fund. There was a whole little industry built around analyzing mutual funds. You remember this?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we put this 5-star fund. We'd come back a year later, did I underperform the index again? Went from being a 5-star manager to a 1-star manager. Like, well, that didn't work. Make it even worse, we looked at the one we took out, and he did fine. It's like, okay, that's bad. So then we decided we'll put 3-star mutual funds in there, and maybe they'll stay 3 stars. That actually did work pretty good.
Okay.
But then there came a new innovation in, I think it was 1998. And the exchange traded fund was created. And so we watched that kind of mature. In about 1998, we started putting exchange traded funds in the portfolios.
Okay.
It took us about 5 years to transition out of mutual funds into exchange traded funds. It was a fairly lengthy process. but it was able to solve a lot of the problems, a lot of the manager performance problems, a lot of the tax slop associated with mutual funds.
Sure.
And we were able to get exact performance against whatever benchmark. It was spectacular. It has been the most significant investment impact over the years ever.
Some of the other pressures that I've noted that are sort of bearing down on what you do include inside and outside of the profession or the industry. We see brilliant people devising new investment strategies seemingly every day, and it appears that these investment strategies are really constantly emerging to counter a particular weakness in some other strategy that was formed, or to take advantage of a new investment device. And now we've got really the advent and the coming charge, if you will, of artificial intelligence sort of bearing down on everything that we do as professional service companies. And so when you look at those pressures, and that they're really more pressures than ever before now, it seems like, how do you see your field changing in the future? Do you see the way you do your job changing, or do you see even the manner in which you counsel clients changing with artificial intelligence capabilities and that kind of thing?
So the technology shift has occurred, and it's been moving constantly through my entire profession and entire career. So what do I see changing? What I see changing is that you can now take your phone and determine the value of your portfolio in seconds. You can take a computer device and you can answer questions like, is my financial plan still working? Artificial intelligence is just going to enhance that. And it's kind of like planes. Did you know that these planes we fly in can land themselves?
All right, absolutely.
You don't even need a pilot in there. Oh, I'm quite happy there's a pilot in there.
Right, exactly. Great analogy.
The job I do is fundamentally the same. It's help people figure out what it is they want, help them figure out where they are, determine what needs to be done, the analysis, and then put it in place and make it happen. Right. That has never changed.
Right,
I don't think technology is going to change that process. How we do that is changing. And I find that fascinating. What I'm able to do in just a few minutes used to take several days. Do you know, Bob, that if you wanted to have a meaningful discussion about your financial plan, I could be at a point where I'm ready to have that discussion in about 20 minutes.
Amazing.
In the past, it would take me a week. Several days. Yeah, we'd schedule an appointment, it'd be a week out, and then maybe I'd be able to present to you maybe a financial plan. Now, if you want to know, if I buy a house in San Francisco, will that impact my retirement? I can answer that question within minutes.
Yeah.
And so artificial intelligence is going to continue to advance that. Same thing with investments. It's going to continue to bring innovation into investments.
Sure. And so much of this is really driven to get straight to the consumer, in this case, straight to the investor. Is that really what it means for the investor, that they're just going to have other tools available to them? Or do you feel like it's really going to enhance their investment returns over time?
It will enhance the investment returns only if we can modify investor behavior. And so you mentioned that the S&P 500 did 7%. Was your number. Okay, well, when you measure how investors do compared to that number, what do you think it is?
Yeah, no idea.
It's something like 2 and 3%. And why is that? I mean, because this is the essence of what this is about.
Right.
It's if you make bad timing decisions on putting money in, taking money out, changing the risk, you can wreck your return.
Yeah.
That's why we work really hard at working with clients to help identify the risk and make sure we do a really good job of communicating that.
Right.
If you know what we're going to do is we're going to let this portfolio fall by a third. I mean, you're not going to be happy.
Right.
That means everyone else is down 50 to 60%.
Right.
You're down a third.
Right.
And when it's down there, we're going to call and ask you to take some of your safe money and go buy that stuff that's doing really horrible.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
That behavior is what makes a difference.
Okay. So when we look at all of these pressures that we've been talking about, regulatory pressures, pressures within your industry, changes in technology, what I really want to know is what keeps you up at night?
We've spent a long time working on this. I've been doing financial planning for 34 years.
Right.
And so over the years, we have worked to solve a lot of the problems that have come along.
Sure.
The ones that we worry about at night are almost all driven by investor behavior. It is not that the portfolios aren't in a good position or the tax laws are going to change. It's making sure that clients, when they need to make the right decisions.
Right.
The times when you need to make these decisions is the most adverse.
Sure.
You make bad calls when things are really bad. We can do unrepairable damage. I worry about that plenty.
Yeah, and again, it kind of goes back to the consistent growth patterns and the growth curves in the market itself. If we don't get jumpy, if we don't get panicky about a particular strategy or portfolio, let that play out within the market scheme itself, we typically will turn out fine, just fine.
Now, you have to have a lot of things set up beforehand.
Right.
For example, you can't run this strategy using Enron stock.
Right.
Yeah, Enron stock went to zero.
Yep.
Yeah, so you got to use the right kinds of investments.
Yeah, we mentioned several of your achievements earlier. Is there one that sort of stands out to you that meant the most to you so far?
When I was a young financial advisor, I worked on my CFP, my COU, my CHSC. These are the major designations back then.
Yep.
And back in the day, the capstone designation was the registry. It was a registry of financial planning practitioners. And I remember that was what I wanted. It was really hard to get. And so I worked on it pretty diligently. It took me about a year of solid effort.
Okay.
And I finally got into the registry. I was so excited. I was one of the youngest advisors in the country that was actually admitted in.
Wow.
And so, yeah, that was a really big deal.
That is not a surprise to me, knowing the discipline and work ethic that you bring to this effort in this your profession. It does not surprise me that you were the youngest. Well, is there something still out there that you want to achieve? Is there a benchmark or a milestone, assets under management, or some award or recognition that you're still kind of looking for out there?
We're working on, we call it the 10-year plan. And the 10-year plan is that at some point you and I are going to be really old. We might already be there.
I think I'm there.
And when we get to that point, at some point we're going to need to be able to retire.
Right.
Now, financially, we're fine. That's not the issue. It's making sure that we've got the business of Schroeder and Associates ready in case something happens to me.
Right.
And so we've been working on this now for about 8 years. And it means that you got to get everything set right. You got to get the investments right. You got to get the infrastructure right. And you have to make sure the clients are ready, just in case.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we're working on that. That's been one of the most significant things we're still working on.
Okay.
And then we're really close to almost $1 billion under management. And so we're moving towards that. We'll get there in the next couple of years.
$1 billion.
Yeah.
That's just amazing. That's
I know.
Fascinating. That's awesome. Well, for those that might want to help you get there, how can they read about you and about your firm or find a way to contact you?
Well, it's Google up Ralph Schroeder, Financial Advisor.
Right.
It's a great way to find me.
Right.
Schroeder and Associates, Financial Advisor. Financial Advisor in the Woodlands. Yeah, I'm easy to find.
Okay, excellent.
And they can just track us down.
Excellent. Well, I always like to address a question for students that might be watching. So the question I like to pose to you is, what skill should they be trying to develop in order to be successful in this field? Is it a personal skill like a work ethic and discipline, or is it a technical skill or an educational skill?
The job I have is one that mirrors technical proficiency and caring and empathy.
Right.
So I think of it, it would be a good meld between an engineer and a social worker.
There we go.
You don't typically find that in one package.
Right.
But that would be a good frame of reference. And so what do you work on? You need to be technically proficient.
Right.
So if you want to get into this business, you have to get the recognizable credentials. You have to be certified. That's really the first step. The second part is you need to learn how to communicate and to bond with clients.
Right.
I take care of people and their money. This is a very personal thing.
Yeah,
I know more about most of our clients' wealth than they do.
Yeah.
So we know about their family, we know the history, we know the money, we know what makes them tick.
Yeah.
So you got to blend those two.
So somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, Ralph, I want to be a financial advisor." What advice do you give them?
Good luck. The advice I would give would be go get your certification.
Right, right.
And then go talk to financial advisors. Go find the most successful ones you can find.
Right.
Go talk to them and see how they got there. The world has changed in 34 years. When I started, I would show up and I'd say, "I'm a financial advisor." And people would say, "What's that?"
Yeah.
Or and then they'd say, "You're not from around here, are you?"
Right.
I mean, it was pretty funny.
Right.
Now, if I say I'm a financial advisor, you at least have some idea, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so the world has changed a lot in 34 years.
Yeah.
This is a recognized profession. You can go to school and get a designation and a degree in financial planning.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
That's what you need to do, is go get the recognizable training and education first.
So we talked a little bit about artificial intelligence a few minutes ago. I'd like to throw you a curveball a little bit. You and I like a show on Showtime called Billions.
Oh yeah.
This year they've got a new sort of plan in place for their show, and it included the development of some artificial intelligence device around the investment and the timing of investments and that sort of thing as part of your industry. How realistic is that to assume that there could be developed that kind of an intelligence program to really get it right every time, or 98% of the time?
It is very possible, but what you find is you get smart people working on these kind of problems. They crack the code on this, and they solve it, and they make $1 bazillion, right?
Right.
Well, someone else is not going to be sitting there minding their own. They're going to figure out what they did and what algorithms they did use, and they're going to replicate it. And now we're starting to eat into the profits. We have more people chasing after the returns. And this happens repeatedly in the financial industry as innovation leads to duplication, which then erodes away the profits.
Sure.
And so, sure, that's very possible. The first guys in are the ones who make bazillions. The guys after them make lots of money, and then it gets eroded away.
That's the case really with any competitive business.
Yes.
You're always looking at your competition for how they're going to come behind you and duplicate what you do and that kind of thing. So it really does come down to oversight, risk mitigation, and making sure that you've got a good diversified portfolio. Is that accurate to say?
And consistent effort year after year after year. You know, the game plan always is to make sure you're doing the right things consistently year after year. The span of this money in many cases is 30, 40 years, and in many cases is generational.
Right.
And so you always have to be mindful that these are long spans of time and money.
Sure.
And so you're going to make good decisions consistently year after year after year.
Yeah.
Welcome to what my job is. This is what we do all day long.
Congratulations on that, by the way.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, Ralph, this has been a fascinating conversation. We've talked about the markets a little bit, some history in the markets. We've talked about business owners and the pressures on them. We've talked about your industry and the pressures on it. So I really appreciate you coming out and talking with us, and thank you very much.
You're welcome.